So thanks for being here, and I appreciate that you guys came, obviously. Actually, last talk of the last day, so even more impressive. So thanks to Hack in the Box for having me. It's been 8 years since I've been here, so I'm really grateful to be back. And I'm going to get a small, rough idea of what you guys do, for example, day to day. This talk is basically for pen testers, and it's also for the other side, which is basically people who obtain penetration testing services from vendors. And basically what I'm going to be talking about is obtaining critical information from the RFQ process, which basically helps with enumeration, so enumeration techniques. So just a little bit more about who I am, and just a quick side note as well is that this is actually supposed to be a 50-minute talk, so I'm cramming it into a 30-minute talk. If you've got questions, I'm happy to answer them afterwards. Basically, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Telspace Systems, and basically 20 years in, trying to keep some sort of work-life balance, which is really difficult because I really love what I do. This is something that I'm very passionate about. And specifically for this talk, I dealt with about 300 or 400 RFQs. But in my total lifespan in terms of pen testing, it's been about 4,000 RFQs. So it's been quite a few. And essentially I saw some gaps, and basically I wanted to, present what those gaps were to the rest of the world. So essentially I'm going to be talking about all these buzzwords, because the buzzwords in the industry are really actually something that gets to me and it gets to a lot of people. We're hearing about apt and next gen and cyber and war this and zero access and kill chain and all that stuff. So you're going to hear a lot of that. I don't like those words, but you're going to hear a lot of them. And essentially people are falling for those, buzzwords. And when I mean falling for the buzzwords, it's really easy to set up like a random company with very special buzzwords, and people basically get you on vendor lists and you can basically start selling services to companies. And essentially that's where we're going with this talk. But basically it's about the incorrect RFQ procedures. So at the end of the day, I'd like you guys to basically forget the buzzwords and kind of move on in terms of maturity when it comes down to the procurement process. For the pen testers, it's obviously something that we learn a lot more about through this process. So companies are really being broken into from very simple things at the moment. We're not at a stage where day-to-day, like 0 day, is breaking into the majority of firms. And if they are, then it's a very targeted attack. At the moment, it's stuff like password compliance policies, it's incorrect firewall rules, misconfiguration, out-of-date daemons, things like that. Not this crazy, insane 0 day, day-to-day. Essentially, we're doing the RFQ process wrong. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I've seen so many RFQ documents that give out a lot of information that is completely unnecessary. I'm going to give you a lot of examples of this, and it brings in multiple complications. We're basically inviting a bunch of attackers into our network. We're sharing a lot of confidential information with them that we shouldn't be sharing with them. And we don't really even have NDAs with them. I'm going to be showing you a lot of these different ones. A case in point really would be of our personal experiences. We had a tender briefing or RFQ or RFP, depending on which one you actually use, briefing about a month ago. And we had about 40 people basically arriving at this potential customer. Where I'm from Johannesburg in South Africa, we don't have 40 vendors. So who are these people that are attending these briefings that are basically getting information about your business? How do you vet that list? Essentially what we're doing is we're inviting the attackers into our network, we're inviting criminals into our network, and we're teaching them about our network topology, our external network and our internal network. And essentially it's really difficult to vet that list. It's really hard. And what we're seeing on our side is we're seeing that people are advertising these RFQs and tenders in newspapers and online and on tender bulletins and things like that. So we basically got two different scenarios. There's a lot more, but the one is we can really win a tender quite easily or win an RFQ by going in super cheap. And, after that we can then steal data, cause havoc, do what we need to do as a real attacker and then disappear, which is a problem. Better yet, what we can do is find out all information about the security of a particular firm, and then when the real test from a legitimate competitor actually happens, we can again cause havoc and actually blame it on that vendor. So there's a lot of different scenarios. These are just two of them that I'm mentioning to you, but they're very, very bad scenarios, and it gets a lot worse. There's also something called resellers in our industry, which is it gets down to a level where the guys don't actually have the skills, so they're outsourced to third parties for penetration testing. And this causes massive issues and also unnecessary costs. One of the things is because cyber is really hot right now, and you can make a lot of money from it. So people that have got ties in companies basically get third parties to do this kind of testing for them, and then they put a markup upon a markup, and it's completely unnecessary. So what I'm saying is, during your day-to-day jobs, don't forget about the procurement process in terms of penetration testing or red teaming. That process should actually be tested as well as the supply chain. Proof of concept. So we're often seeing supply chain attacks now where there's different proof of concept attacks. And what I mean by that is we get a RFQ document, and in that RFQ document, they say, okay, well, in order for you to win this work, you need to do a proof of concept for free, which is a massive problem. There's a lot of different things that cause issues. But in terms of a case study, we had a very large international bank about 3 or 4 months ago. And what basically happened was they went out and they said, oh, well, we're really interested in your services, and we want all this pen testing. And we said, cool, that's not a problem. Here's the quotation, here's everything. And they came back to us and basically said, all right, we're really interested in your services, really want to subscribe, but the problem here is that, we need a set of testing done for free because we don't have budget for this testing. So we said, no, well, unfortunately we can't do that, and it's not really the right thing to do in the procurement process anyway. So they said, okay, cool, we'll find another way around this. So what they did was they issued an RFP document or RFQ document, and they said as part of the terms and conditions, we have to test the predefined environment, which has vulnerabilities that they know of, so they can test all the vendors against each other, and then, see who's better, basically, and then award the tender. So we said, that's fine, that's not a problem, that's fair. Anyway, the RFQ document came out, we submitted, everything kind of went well, apparently, and then we had questions and answer sessions, and those went well. And then they came back to us and they said, all right, well done. You've made the next round, which is the last round. That's between you and 1 or 2 other vendors. What we're going to do is we're going to send you the defined environment now to take a look at. So what we do is we actually end up getting a WhatsApp message with credentials to live internet banking. And they ask us to test that as the proof of concept. So, obviously we said no, and there's a lot of issues with that process, but this is the kind of thing that we're actually seeing day to day, because what they wanted us to do was basically do a free test from the beginning, and they did this roundabout way of us actually getting to a point where we would do this free testing. We said, no, that's not an environment that has predefined vulnerabilities, because if it does have predefined vulnerabilities, you've got a bigger problem. So we're seeing a lot of this, and obviously we backed out of that process for various reasons, but proof of concepts are a really bad idea. Anyway, how do we exploit this RFQ process? We're going to get into the documents now. And what we did was we created this 16,000 line piece of code. It's really complex. It correlates different kind of media and basically puts everything together, very highly classified information, and puts it into a really nice displayable format. Some say the code was so advanced that Dylan from Hack in the Box didn't really understand it. Our CTO, William, and our COO, Manny, didn't really understand it either. But anyway, no, not really, not at all. I'm just kidding. That was actually a search engine optimization diagram. If you go back there, you'll see that. It's got nothing to do with this whole process. But if the targets give you everything on Google, you don't need to make anything. And this is what we're going to show you. We're going to show you the actual screenshots and the URLs of real, active, live RFQs documents. Before we get into that, I'm going to give you 4 quick issues that we've seen over the period of time. One of them is basically we had a very major international bank that issued us with a purchase order that was actually meant for another vendor for $250,000. I don't know how that happens, but basically, not only do we know that obviously that vendor is doing the work there, but we also know that, as an example, certain predefined work is actually being done there. And then we had a very large government department that awarded us with a letter in our email. Opened the letter and it said, Dear X, who's actually one of our competitors, congratulations for actually winning the work. So obviously we lost the work, but we got the award letter that was meant for one of our competitors. So again, we know what's happening. Then we have another one, international telco, very big international telco. They sent us an Excel sheet with all of the vendors, with all the vendors' pricing, with all the vendors' service offerings. And this is stuff that's happening day to day. It's not like very isolated things that we're seeing over a period of time. So it's really serious. Then we had a instance of a really big revenue service, international revenue service, where basically we lost that specific set of work because we didn't know internal acronyms. So that basically tells us that was specifically for one vendor, which is really bad. So getting into it, what can we get from enumeration? What can we get from this process? And basically we can get network diagrams, we can get internal incident response plans, we can get internal, external IP addresses, obviously domains, things like that. We can get firewall types, network topologies, we can get patch levels, operating system versions, and more. But basically I want to stress that none of these screenshots that I'm going to show you now from the internet, none of them are our customers, none of them we've signed an NDA with. This is stuff that you can search for online. So the first one I'm going to show you is basically straight from a document, and this is for a UK firm, and you can see that's for a public sector network. And basically we can see a breakdown of the internet-facing systems here. I just want to focus on BlackBerry Enterprise Server, the SafeCom application. There's firewalls, network devices, thin desktop clients. We can see the locations of these as well. Example here, we can basically see that there's many servers that they have and interfaces between Microsoft Exchange and different firewalls. But at the bottom of the screen, because there's a lot of text here for you to focus on, we can see that they're running Outlook 2003 and Outlook 2010. So that tells us a lot of different things as an attacker. Obviously, they're running out-of-date software, so there's probably no support for patching as well. They'd have to randomly find a way to patch something that's brand new in terms of vulnerabilities. But it starts giving us a really good example of what the internal network looks like. So in other words, what they're running that we could actually attack as a real attacker. But it also gives us an idea, as an example, in the next screenshot, of for example, domain controllers that they're running, the DHCP servers that they're running. And if you look on the screen now, you'll see at the top there, basically says that there's 8 domain controllers. They're running Windows 2008. We can see they're running Windows 2003, and basically different kind of ISO web applications, patch deployment, the actual locations of them as well. So in the UK, there's like 3 different locations for this specific tender, and we can see where the servers are actually physically located. So this information is really critical information. It shouldn't really be in these documents, and as an attacker, it really helps me kind of map out the internal network. Just going further into this, actually even tells you what's out of scope, which is quite nice for an attacker. So they say, like, please don't attack these things, because we don't actually want you to attack these. So there's 35 live servers on the extranet. There's about 16 firewalls. I'm going to kind of speed through this because obviously I'm condensing this presentation. But essentially, this document basically tells us that there's Runcorn, there's Sheffield and London and Darlington locations, and basically where the firewalls are, what the internal network looks like, and we can carry on obviously reading through this, but it's a lot of text to actually go through. But if you're obviously an attacker and you've got time, this stuff is a goldmine for you. Then we're looking at something called EduServe, which is quite interesting. It was in a few slides back. But what we can see is that it's actually got upload and download functionality. So it's a web application. And if you're an attacker and you're familiar with OWASP and all those, you're pretty much going to have an opportunity there to upload something. And there's different repositories with upload and download functionality. Then we're basically looking at a .gov. So on the top left, I put the URLs for you guys to access. And essentially what we can see on this one is even more information. We can see they've broken it down really nicely in terms of external, internal penetration testing, server configuration penetration testing. And we can see that from this screenshot, they're running 2012 R2 and 2016. They've got SharePoint, they've got MS SQL. So they're mapping things out really well for us once again. I'm not going to focus too much on this, but you get the idea. For example, there's web application assessments here and so forth. Again, this is Kirkland government as well, and we can see here, this is actually a Q&A document. So in terms of the tender process and RFQ process, what happens is you get the opportunity to ask questions as well. So you can say, if you, as an example, don't know something or you want more information, then they answer those. And this is really interesting because in this one, they actually tell you a lot of information they shouldn't be telling you. One is, as an example, is physical infrastructure actually in scope, such as sewerage, such as water, electric, stuff like that. In this case, it actually is. And then a really arbitrary question, when was the last penetration test actually completed? You can see it was 2011. And then obviously my favorite part of this is physical security. So if you look at the bottom, it actually says what kind of physical security do you have in place? And they say, yes, we'd like it tested, but we don't have guard dogs or actual guards. Pretty random, but still very useful for me as an attacker to know. We also get more intricate details. So this is what we call a proposed network diagram, and obviously there is a normal network diagram. I didn't put all of them in here. Again, I left the URLs up for you guys to take a look at, and obviously Hack in the Box has already released the slides, so you can obviously just click them and see them for yourselves. But essentially we see that there's a lot of information these guys are giving us about where the internet breakout points are, what specific firewalls there are, where the DMZ is. This kind of information is exactly what I want as either a penetration tester for enumeration or as a real attacker. This one is specifically for internet banking. It's even more useful for me for monetary gain. So we can see that it's an Infosys product for internet banking, and we can see that it's Oracle as well. So internet banking is running off Infosys. We know they're running an Oracle database. We have one public IP. We know a little bit more information about what we're attacking once again. And obviously this is in scope. So out of scope, often something that they put in these documents as well. This is quite possibly one of my favorites because it's actually web applications. So we're looking at payment portals, and on the other side, we're looking at something that was specifically designed for IT security professionals. So the top right, you'll see that the web portal has been developed for providing technology-enhanced learning for IT security professionals and so forth. The nice thing about this is it gives you a pre-prod URL, so you can actually look at the application, in a pre-prod environment. But they also give you information like what CMS they're actually running, what versions of MySQL or MS SQL, depending on what they're running. But for example, on the one on the right, you can actually see they're running Moodle. So we can already prepare our attacks from before, which is amazing. And then this is the last one of that RFQ. There were actually 3 applications, but as per the last slide, we can obviously see it's JSP and HTML. There is a CMS, and it provides upload functionality. So we can already prepare our attacks. We can look through the pre-prod URL. So this stuff is really, really nice for me as an attacker. Then we're going into a different section, complete comparison to this. This is actually award section. So when things get awarded, often they go out and they say, okay, cool, as part of a transparency effort, we're basically going to tell you who's been awarded a set of work. So this is just something from South Africa. These are all over the world. It isn't something that is unique to our country. This is for transparency reasons. It's basically to show the public and to show everybody else that, okay, a specific vendor won in a legitimate way. But these also provide very bad information to attackers. So this screen that I'm showing you and the URL that's there is basically telling us who tendered for a specific set of work, and it actually tells us how much they actually tendered for as well. So in this case, we can see Deloitte actually won this. It was a financial services company. So as an attacker, we've got, 2 entrance points here. The first one is you can say, hey, I'm phoning from Deloitte. We won the penetration test. Can you give us information about your network, please? Because obviously we need to start the penetration test. And again, this isn't unique to my country. It's all over the world, even more so for things like military spending, transparency. Another spin on this is basically we can actually say, okay, cool, we won the tender process. We're going to pull out. We're going to basically get another vendor to win. And if we know, who's competed, for example, if we look at the previous information I gave you about when you go to those tender briefings, we can basically, from that list of tenderers, we can basically again blame that vendor when we do something very malicious. So there's a lot of different entrance points here, but another thing I'm going to go back to is the reseller agreements. So a little bit earlier I told you about resellers. If you look at these, the pricing is really random. So we can't see, for example, in this case who won, but the ones underneath that are pretty well-known companies. And we can see that, pretty much it's about 2.2 million rand, which is about $200,000 roughly. And I want to show you like a discrepancy in pricing as an example for the resellers that I showed you before. So in the next screenshot, which is this one, you can see that at the bottom, there's a company for 32 million. So we're talking about 15 times a really good pen testing firm's pricing. So there's a problem there. There's a really big issue. And this isn't something that we're seeing once in a while. We're seeing this almost with every tender, like a lot of random companies applying for work, and just really beefing up the pricing because there's so many parties that are actually involved before the actual work gets done, which is ridiculous. So you can start seeing everything is kind of piecing together now. But anyway, back to procurement documents. Again, like we basically have another example of a local firm. This one is basically asking if we get a high-level network diagram, and they're saying not required because it's all from a center location. We can see that they're running Splunk in this one. We can see that there's around 10 firewall changes per month, roughly. And pretty much we can see the operating system breakdown at the bottom. So various operating systems from 2003 to 2012. We have some Linux boxes, some AIX. But essentially what I'm trying to say is your enumeration is pretty much done, from an attacker's perspective here. Again, we're going to the questions and answers. So This one is also one of my favorite screenshots because, and I actually took the answer out of this, is it says at the bottom, question 7 is, what is the expected SLA time, in terms of intrusion detection? So how long will it take once you've broken in until they catch you? And this stuff is, I actually can't make this up because it's actually almost difficult to think that someone actually put this together and said like it will be useful for a potential pen testing firm without an NDA to know this stuff. But anyway, it goes on to even more detail. It tells you when their firewall rules have licenses until which firewalls they have. For example, Cisco ASA firewalls and so forth. But this one is pretty severe. This is actually a Reserve Bank tender that actually went out. This details Swift environments and Swift transfers. So this one is really serious. And it tells you about the real-time gross settlement systems, which are basically called SAMOS. And it gives us a very good idea of everything and how it actually looks internally. So this screenshot is the internal architecture and external architecture of how Swift actually works. So if you really want to know how Swift works and you want to basically make some money, they give it to you. This is how Swift works in our organization. It's a reserve bank, so we can get money out the country quite easily. And it basically tells you how Swift Alliance server talks to other applications, like web application servers, what the technologies are, and it basically goes into a logical view of the actual network. And then it goes into more detail and tells you about the application server and the database server and how these actually interact with each other, and pretty much where the databases are actually stored. Transactional messages, for example, are sent and received by the SAMOS application via MQ and Swift Alliance access. And basically the application binaries are stored on the SAN. So we're getting a really good idea of how we can get money out if we had to attack this specific reserve bank. Anyway, it goes into more detail about the application server. We can see that it's running on an AIX partition. So in terms of an attacker, and this is a lot of information to take in a 25 or 30 minute talk, but basically have a look at the slides because you'll be able to see how everything interacts with each other over HTTPS. And as an attacker, this is gold. It goes into the Swift infrastructure and Alliance server as well. So we can see the purpose of the Swift service to host Swift software components required to connect to SwiftNet. Basically, for me, we can see how HTTP connectivity works along with their VPN boxes. It's easy money. It tells you about user authentication authorization. It goes into a level where it's implemented using two-factor USB hard tokens or PKI. Essentially, this is everything that I want, again, as an external attacker. The funniest part here is that at the bottom, it actually says the successful vendor will be provided with more information once they sign an NDA. So I'm not really too sure what more information we need, but it's actually scary. Just speeding this up, because I know I'm almost out of time on this side. This isn't just for penetration testing. It's actually all different tenders. So it's AV tenders, it's EDR, it's anything kind of cyber. That's why we go back to forget the buzzwords. There's pretty much methods for everything that is supplied in an organization. And we're seeing this supply chain attacks, everything from actual hardware. So here's some short examples. This is quite a serious website for Canada. It's basically an official site of the municipal government and looks pretty official to everybody, but you can see they actually have transit schedules, different kind of opportunities and things for jobs. It's like basically home and property. It's the official site of the municipal government for Halifax for Canada. What we can see here is that we can see what endpoint protection is running and what's being used, how many units have actually been procured, how many, when the actual licenses actually expire. And essentially from my side as an attacker, once again, I can see what I need to prepare for in terms of an attack once I'm inside. So I can see in terms of EDR, this is what they're running. This is how many endpoints they have. This is amazing once again. Actually, if we go back to this one, you can actually have contact details for more information. So you can just pick up the phone and ask them for more info if you want. Then we are looking at Oman Gas. And this is another huge company. As you can see, it says we work around the clock. Multi-billion-dollar company. Same thing happens here. We can see they're running McAfee Plus with endpoint protection and they're actually looking to upgrade. And they're running ETP and they're looking for CTP. So it's basically complete exploit threat protection, endpoint threat protection. More buzzwords, sorry, got confused there. But we can see that this is what they're going out on tender RFQ for. Anyway, it's very hard to fix something like this. It's extremely difficult. So I don't want to be one of these people that basically says, this is wrong, this is horrible, and don't give you a fix for it. Transparency is key, especially in these days. So it's basically a transparency versus XY. And what I mean by XY is that we can be as transparent as possible for government reasons or internal procurement reasons. We have to follow procedures internally if we want to get certain things. I get that. It's really hard to actually stop this because as normal parts of procurement, you go out to, for example, your boss and you say, I want to procure this, and they go out to procurement department and then they go out on tender for it, and you normally don't have anything to do with that process. I know it's very difficult, and we can obviously discuss supply chain attacks, everything, for example, by backdooring microprocessors on computers and then supplying them. And there's a lot of different things that we can discuss here. It's a fine line. It's a balancing act between exposing that confidential information and actually having transparent processes. And solving this is really hard. It's not something that's easy. These are a few things I recommend. Basically, closed tender processes. Closed tender processes in terms of vetting all vendors beforehand. In other words, properly vetting them with criminal checks, background checks, have a really trusted, well-known suppliers list for everything that you do, with track records, with contactable references for the guys that have actually done work before, obviously staff credentials and stuff like criminal vetting that I actually spoke about before. But one of the key things is don't advertise blindly on the internet for very confidential things, and obviously newspapers. That's really, really big part of it. And obviously from my side, forget all the buzzwords. And, remember this presentation if you're going to go out on tender or RFQ for anything. But I know that I've just run out of time. So if anybody's got questions, I think I have about 2 minutes. So thanks very much. Thanks for attending as the last presentation of the day, guys.
Thank you as well, Dino.